It is now being reported that authorities are investigating the sudden death of Hayden Panettiere for any signs of criminality, while the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, has also jumped in as well. What does this tell us about what happened to the actress?
Fentanyl was found in her system before the DEA even walked in the door. That's not confirmed. What is confirmed is this: Hayden Panettiere was 36 years old, and after her death, a federal drug agency was already involved. That alone tells you something about how unusual this case looks to the people investigating it. I'm going to walk you through what's actually been reported, the timeline, the people in that apartment, and the question investigators still can't answer. And I want to be upfront: no one has been charged with anything. No one has been accused of a crime. But there are details here that don't sit easily next to each other, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why.
Things are reportedly evolving in connection with the death of actress Hayden Panettiere. We started the week by learning that the 36-year-old was found Sunday unresponsive in cardiac arrest at this apartment that she was temporarily staying at in Greenville, South Carolina. First responders apparently tried to conduct these life-saving measures, but she was pronounced dead at the scene at 2:32 p.m. There was even reportedly dispatch audio where you can seemingly hear the word overdose. This is shocking. This is sad. This is incredibly tragic, especially when you consider the Nashville star had publicly addressed addiction in the past, a battle with postpartum depression in the past. And look, while the preliminary findings of the autopsy reportedly found no signs of trauma, and the Greenville Police Department indicated they didn't appear to find any evidence of foul play or suspicious circumstances.
Sunday, Greenville, South Carolina. Panettiere is staying at an apartment, not her home, a temporary residence, when she's found unresponsive, in cardiac arrest. First responders try to revive her. She's pronounced dead at the scene at 2:32 p.m. Reportedly, on the dispatch audio, you can make out one word: overdose. Now, on its face, that's a tragedy the public might have understood, even accepted. Panettiere had spoken publicly about her own struggles with addiction and postpartum depression. The initial autopsy found no signs of trauma. Local police said, at first, there was no evidence of foul play. So why is the DEA involved?
Now, we are getting word that things may be evolving, things may be escalating. TMZ has reported that law enforcement sources indicated to them that authorities are investigating whether a crime has been committed, namely because of how unexpected Hayden Panettiere's death is. And so law enforcement is investigating this seemingly at the same time as the coroner's office. And by the way, it's been reported that no cause or manner of death has been determined and that they're awaiting the toxicology results, right? The toxicology test, the toxicology report, which could take some time. And then you couple that with reporting that is now coming out by multiple outlets like Fox, CNN, the New York Times, that the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, we're talking federal agency here, has joined the investigation. So the questions I have, the questions I think we all have are, why? What does this mean? What are they looking for? What is happening now behind the scenes? So I'm going to be bringing on a retired detective shortly just to talk about that, what we should be thinking about. But first, let me just give you some more information.
That's the question a retired detective raised when this story broke. And it's worth sitting with, because the DEA doesn't typically get pulled into cases that look like a straightforward accidental overdose. When they show up, it's usually because they believe the substances involved trace back to a supplier or a network they're already watching. Reportedly, no cause or manner of death has been officially determined. Toxicology results are still pending. And yet, multiple outlets, Fox, CNN, the New York Times, are reporting federal involvement before the toxicology results were known. If you noticed that gap before I said it out loud, you were paying closer attention than most. Let's talk about who was in that apartment.
Some more information, okay? So we have also learned that reportedly the Heroes actress on-again, off-again boyfriend, Brian Hickerson, and his brother Zach were at the scene, were at the apartment, that they placed the 911 phone call. CNN is claiming the police report indicates that an officer interviewed the brothers, with the police report saying, quote, "I spoke with Zach Hickerson first. He advised this was his brother's girlfriend," CNN is also reporting that Brian Hickerson allegedly showed officers a bag of medications at the apartment. This is per a police report. And by the way, TMZ has also reported that sources claim Narcan was found at this apartment too, which is used to treat an opioid overdose. Now, something to note about Brian Hickerson, if you're not familiar with him.
Panettiere's on-again, off-again boyfriend Brian Hickerson and his brother, Zach, were reportedly there. They called 911. According to a police report cited by CNN, Zach identified himself to officers and said this was his brother's girlfriend. Brian Hickerson allegedly showed officers a bag of medications inside the apartment. And according to TMZ, sources say Narcan, the drug used to reverse an opioid overdose, was also found on scene. None of that, by itself, is damning. Narcan has become common in households where someone uses opioids or depressants. It saves lives. It's entirely possible it was there, because someone was trying to be prepared, or because paramedics brought it in. But it's a detail investigators will want explained.
If it's true that Narcan was present there, what does that tell you?
So it's interesting. I noted that, and what's not clear to me is whether the Narcan was brought to the scene by emergency medical personnel or whether it was already on scene. If it was already on scene, it's fairly common now for people who use central nervous system depressant drugs and opiates to have Narcan handy because it is a lifesaver. Overdoses, particularly from fentanyl, have been reduced dramatically, at least deaths from overdoses have been reduced dramatically because users have access to and use Narcan. So again, if this was something that was planned, that they would have Narcan on hand is not surprising. And obviously, emergency medical personnel carry Narcan with them because they respond routinely to overdoses, particularly on fentanyl and other CNS depressant drugs.
Was it already there? Who kept it there? And why? Now here's where the story gets harder to look at.
When it comes to Hayden Panettiere, he had been accused by the actress of domestic abuse, particularly in her memoir just a few months back. The New York Times was reporting that back in March, only a few months before Hayden Panettiere died, she had reportedly hired security to keep Hickerson away. That court documents reveal he was sentenced to 45 days in jail after pleading no contest to 2 felony domestic violence charges for injuring Panettiere. Panettiere wrote in her memoir, "What I never told them was that the abuse I'd endured didn't feel as bad as the thought of being alone." And by the way, Hickerson himself even came out after this memoir was published, apologized for what happened, saying it was true, that he was in a dark place that included issues with substances, and that it was a, quote, terrible thing I did to her. In fact, let me call this out too, Hayden Panettiere's estranged mother, Leslie Vogel, has now spoken out too, telling NBC in part, quote, "This person in her life that we've been trying to get rid of for quite some time was with her at her death," and that was Brian Hickerson. Back in May, Hickerson called Vogel, quote, "one of the worst people I've ever met in my life."
Brian Hickerson is not a stranger to allegations of violence against Panettiere. In a memoir published just months before her death, she wrote about enduring abuse from him, and about a fear of being alone that outweighed the fear of the abuse itself. Court records show Hickerson pleaded no contest to 2 felony domestic violence charges for injuring her, and served 45 days in jail. In March, only months before she died, the New York Times reported she had hired security specifically to keep him away from her. He apologized publicly after her memoir came out, called it a dark period tied to his own struggles with substances, said in his words, "It was a terrible thing he did to her. And yet he was there when she died." Ask yourself what that timeline is telling you. A woman who reportedly hired security to stay away from a man just months earlier is found dead in an apartment where he's present, and he's the one who called it in. Her estranged mother, Leslie Vogel.
And there have been reports about what the relationship was like between Hayden Panettiere and her mother. But we go back to August 2022. So Hickerson was actually sentenced to several years of probation for violating his probation, had to complete a year-long domestic violence treatment program, attend AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, these meetings, complete dozens of anger management sessions. This is all according to court records. And there was even reporting that he even tried to get the court to reduce his felony convictions to misdemeanors, but without success. And that he even tried to do so as recently as last week. This is, again, according to court records. Wasn't successful there either. The Hollywood Reporter apparently spoke with Mia Terrazas.
Told NBC that this was a person they'd been trying to get her away from for a long time. And he was with her when she died. Hickerson, for his part, had called Vogel one of the worst people he'd ever met. There's clearly a family fracture here too. And it's not one this video can resolve. But it's part of the picture. A woman who says she was Panettiere's neighbor in West Hollywood told The Hollywood Reporter. She called 911 at least half a dozen times over disturbances involving the couple. And once saw Panettiere leaving on a gurney, with Hickerson right beside her, looking, in her words, terrified.
Who claims to have been Hayden Panettiere's neighbor in West Hollywood, says that she called 911 at least a half a dozen times to report these disturbances, says that she absolutely saw signs of domestic violence with respect to Hickerson, telling the outlet, quote, "I saw her leaving on a gurney, Brian was right next to her, and I asked her if she was okay, and it looked to me that she had suffered some type of trauma that looked to be battering. It was clear she was terrified."
And days after Panettiere's death, according to page 6, police showed up at Hickerson's grandmother's house in Greenville for a welfare check. We don't know if that's connected to the investigation. I want to be clear about that. But it's part of the timeline, and timelines matter in cases like this.
And then there's this. According to page 6, police just showed up to Hickerson's grandmother's house in Greenville, South Carolina. Now, this was for a welfare check. The outlet claimed that Zach was home. Again, this is days after Hayden Panettiere's death, but we cannot say at this point definitively if this has anything to do with Hayden Panettiere's death, if it's any way connected to that investigation, but I'm just going to call this out anyway. To be clear, by the way, no one has been accused of a crime. No one has been charged with a crime in any way here. I just want to make that clear as we're reporting this right now. But before I go into more depth about the investigation, what we should be thinking about, what's happening behind the scenes, why the DEA.
Well, there's a couple of ways that a crime could be involved here. I mean, it is certainly not immaterial that she died in the company of Brian Hickerson, who has been convicted of felony abuse against her. When women die, when they are murdered, it is very often by intimate partners. So absolutely that possibility needs to be part of any state investigation. Beyond any possible culpability on Mr. Hickerson's part, there is the question of, again, if this is a case where she died because she was provided with some kind of illicit substance, where do those substances come from? And is it possible to hold criminally accountable the person or persons that provided her with those substances? So there's really kind of two fronts in terms of looking at criminality: the possible involvement of the intimate partner or other persons that were actually present at the time that she potentially overdosed, and then kind of one step out, where do those substances come from, and can the person or organization that provided those substances be held criminally liable?
But why?
To be clear, again, Hickerson has not been charged. He has not been accused of a crime in connection with her death. The doesn't prove guilt any more than tears would prove innocence.
We bring in retired detective, law enforcement instructor Matt Irvine. Love having Matt on whenever we have these kind of strange investigations, what's happening behind the scenes. Matt, thanks for taking the time. This is just a tragedy on so many different fronts, but I do want to talk about the investigative aspect of it. Why bring the DEA on board?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because the DEA typically does not get involved in cases that appear to be suspected overdoses, even if there is possibly some suspicion of foul play. I would expect that the reason the DEA is involved is they believe that the substances that may have contributed to Hayden Panettiere's death may be connected to a person or organization that is already the subject of their investigation.
You know, a lot of people have already been saying Matthew Perry. Is that what you're talking about? That whatever the and by the way, we don't know as I said, we don't know the cause and manner of death. We don't know the circumstances here. But you're saying you bring the DEA on board if they're now trying to find the suppliers, the people who, if there were substances there, who gave those substances. What resources does the DEA bring into an investigation? What do they do?
Well, the DEA has massive resources. They have tremendous forensic capacity, and this is a case certainly where it appears that they are already looking at communications, looking at devices, The DEA, if they've already got a person or organization under investigation, has a lot of intelligence on that target that they can leverage to support this investigation. I don't know what the law is in South Carolina in terms of being able to charge somebody with homicide for causing the death of another person through the provision of illicit substances. But that is certainly a possibility. And the Matthew Perry case would be the most famous example.
But here's the detail I keep coming back to. In her memoir, Panettiere wrote that the fear of being alone hurt worse than the abuse itself. That's not a line from a police report. That's a woman describing, in her own words, why she stayed. And months later, she was gone, with the same person back in the room. Her daughter, Kaya, is the one left to carry this.
Rest in peace, sweet Hayden, gone far too soon. And going back to Vladimir Klitschko, her ex-partner, ex-fiancé, former heavyweight boxing champion, posted on X, "Our family is going through a time of profound shock and grief. The announcement of Hayden's tragic death saddens me deeply. She left this world far too soon. Hayden was, although no longer my partner, an important part of my life and the mother of our daughter, Kaya. She built an incredible career through immense talent while also facing the darker sides of a very demanding industry. Nothing will erase the times we shared or the place she had in our lives."
Vladimir Klitschko, her ex-fiancé and Kaya's father, said publicly he'll make sure their daughter remembers who her mother really was, not just the headlines. The toxicology report will likely be a key piece in determining where this case goes. Until then, everything else is a person of interest, a bag of medications, and a timeline that raises more questions than it answers.
But why do authorities initially say no trauma, no suspicious circumstances, no evidence of foul play? What would lead them to say that, and how do you reconcile that with the new reporting that they're investigating to make sure a crime wasn't committed?
Well, both things are possible. When they say no evidence of foul play, no trauma, that simply suggests that there was no indication that she was beaten, stabbed, shot, or somehow violently killed. That does not mean that her death, whether it be a accidental overdose or somebody intentionally providing her with enough drugs to kill her, is not a separate crime. So the initial scene did not appear, apparently, to show a violent death. That doesn't mean that the death is not potentially a homicide.
So I'll leave you with this. If a woman takes steps to protect herself from someone, and that same person is with her the night she dies, what does that tell you? And what would it take for you to call that a coincidence?
So, as I said earlier, I think you have to look at them, or at least look at Brian Hickerson as a person of interest in this case until he can be ruled out, simply because he's been convicted of harming her. And again, just statistically, when women are killed, it is very often by intimate partners. So he's an obvious person of interest unless and until he can be eliminated. To that end, they should be interviewing him if he's willing to talk, and they should absolutely be looking at electronic devices. They might also get a warrant for his physical premises, for where he lives and for his vehicle. Again, this is not saying that he is guilty of anything. It's just saying that a thorough investigation should absolutely consider him as a person of interest.
I'm still digging into the toxicology timeline and what South Carolina law says about cases like this. That's coming in the next video, so stay close.
Not at first glance. A lot of folks have been making a lot of noise about the fact that Brian Hickerson did not appear particularly emotional until he was notified that Hayden Panettiere was gone. I think that's a red herring. People who are experiencing traumatic events react in any number of ways. I've seen people be hysterical. I've seen people be catatonic. I've seen people go from one to the other in a matter of minutes. And how you react in hour one is different than how you react on day two. So I think we make a mistake in trying to read into his reaction something that speaks to his potential involvement. There's just no one way to react to trauma.
I thought they said he did show emotion, but maybe I read it wrong.
My recollection was that the brother was quite emotional, and that Hickerson was kind of it sounds like fairly flat in his affect until he was notified of her passing. And again, that is a perfectly normal and potentially perfectly innocent response to trauma.